So picture this. You're strapped into the cockpit of a fighter jet.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, and you are just pulling these aggressive G-forces, right? You're flying at over 600 miles an hour, deep in hostile airspace.
That is incredibly intense.
It gets worse. Suddenly, your radar pings. There is an enemy aircraft directly on your tail. They're locked on and closing fast.
Oh, wow.
And, well, according to basically every established law of aerial combat, every physics manual out there, you are already dead. I mean, you can't outrun them, you can't outclimb them.
Right, yeah, that is pretty much the ultimate nightmare scenario for any fighter pilot. You are just at a complete tactical disadvantage.
Exactly. But what if I told you there was a guy who actually intentionally sought out this exact scenario?
Wait, on purpose?
On purpose. He had this standing $40 bet with the greatest fighter pilots in the world. He bet that if you started a dogfight squarely on his tail, like dead to rights, he could reverse the entire situation, outmaneuver you, and be on your tail with a kill shot in 40 seconds flat.
And, let me guess, he won.
He never lost. Not a single time.
That honestly sounds like a Hollywood movie, but I know it's entirely true.
It is. So today, we are doing a massive deep dive into the wildly unorthodox mind of that exact guy. We've got this huge stack of notes, mostly pulled from this fascinating book, The Mind of War, John Boyd and American Security by Grant T. Hammond.
Yeah, and I think it's important to clarify, our mission here isn't just to, geek out over military history.
Right, definitely not.
We are really going to unpack how this split-second tactical trick used in the skies over Korea evolved into this incredibly profound, universal framework for navigating everyday chaos.
Because honestly, if this guy can figure out how to survive a literal missile lock in 40 seconds, we can probably use his system to handle, I don't know, a surprise project deadline or a blown tire on the highway.
Exactly. That is the real value of John Boyd's legacy. I mean, he's arguably one of the most influential strategic thinkers of the 20th century.
Yet almost nobody knows his name outside of, like, hardcore military or business strategy circles.
Yeah, it's wild. But he didn't just win dogfights. He fundamentally deconstructed how we as human beings process information, make decisions, and just survive when things get totally unpredictable.
I am so ready to get into how we apply this. But going through the Hammond material, I realized we kind of have to understand the crucible that forged this guy first. I mean, he was not your standard buttoned-up, compliant military officer.
Oh, far from it. Boyd was a maverick. And I mean that in the most literal, disruptive sense. You really have to picture his childhood.
Right. He grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, right in the teeth of the Great Depression. And his father died when he was only 3 years old. So he's being raised by a single mother in just this grinding, severe poverty.
So scarcity was basically his entire baseline reality.
Exactly. And that environment instilled this fierce, almost abrasive independence in him. Like, he learned very early on that nobody was coming to save him.
He had to figure out the angles himself.
Yeah, he had to be incredibly tenacious just to survive.
And what's crazy is where he first really channeled that tenacity. Because you read about a fighter pilot and you assume he was, I don't know, getting into street fights or building model airplanes.
Right, the usual pilot backstory.
But Boyd actually built his entire foundational worldview in a swimming pool.
Yeah, that detail in the Hammond text is just brilliant. Boyd became a highly competitive swimmer and also a water polo player. And we really need to look at the psychology there because it basically built the architecture of his strategic mind.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Well, take competitive swimming. You're in a lane. Yes, there are other people in the pool, but who are you actually racing?
You're racing the clock.
Exactly. You are racing the clock and your own previous limitations. So swimming taught Boyd this ultimate discipline of mind over matter. Pushing through the burning in your lungs, the fatigue, just to shave a fraction of a second off of time.
It's a completely closed system of internal mastery.
Yeah. But then you look at the water polo aspect.
Right, and that's where I really started to see the gears turning in his head. I mean, I used to think water polo was just like tossing a ball around in the shallower end.
Oh, it is brutal.
It really is. It's essentially ice hockey played in deep water without any pads.
And crucially, without the ability to stop. The rules literally mandate continuous movement. If you touch the bottom of the pool or if you hold on to the side, it's a penalty.
So if you stop moving, you either lose or you drown.
Pretty much. So it builds insane stamina. But more importantly, it forces this mindset of seamless transition. Like, You burst with raw energy on offense,
Yeah.
and the split second the ball turns over, you have to be instantly on defense, treading water, grappling.
But he saw something deeper in the physics of it, right? The
Yeah.
text mentions he paid a lot of attention to the splashing.
Yes, to an untrained eye, all that water flying everywhere just looks like pure chaos. Just people thrashing around.
Right, it just looks messy.
But to Boyd, it was a tactical weapon. He realized that a lot of that splashing was actually deliberate. Players were kicking and thrashing to create a physical smokescreen.
Cover and concealment in a swimming pool. That is so wild to me.
He was learning the geometry of attack. He figured out, hey, if I can blind my opponent for just 2 seconds with a wall of water, I can pivot, change my angle, and slip right past them.
He's generating ambiguity to get a physical advantage.
Exactly. And he was also constantly testing the referee. This is a classic Boyd trait that shows up his entire life.
Right, because there's usually just one referee walking up and down the side of the pool, right?
Yeah, and that referee can only penalize what they can physically see above the water.
Ah, so everything happening under the surface?
All the grabbing, the kicking, the pulling, it's essentially unregulated warfare.
Wow.
Boyd learned that in any conflict, if you understand the literal boundaries of the rules and you know exactly where the authorities' blind spots are, you have a massive advantage. You aren't necessarily breaking the rules, you're just bending the system just outside their field of view.
That perfectly sets up my absolute favorite story from his early life. So we jump to the winter of 1945. Boyd is this 18-year-old private in the Army Air Forces.
Right, occupation duty in Japan.
Yeah, right after World War II. And it is freezing cold. The enlisted men are sleeping outside in these canvas tents in the snow,
While the officers are sleeping inside a heated wooden barracks.
which is just a recipe for total resentment. Now, most privates would just grumble, maybe try to steal an extra blanket and suffer through it.
Not John Boyd.
No. Boyd decides to go to war with the U.S. military infrastructure. He and a few buddies sneak out, find a couple of old wooden Japanese aircraft hangars, and quietly, piece by piece, they dismantle the buildings.
They literally tear down the hangars, chop up the wood, and burn it in a 55-gallon drum inside their tent, just to stay warm.
He burned down military property, and obviously you cannot hide a raging fire in a canvas tent for very long. So they get caught, and they get dragged before this tribunal of angry officers.
Naturally.
Now, if I am an 18-year-old private standing before a tribunal for destroying government property, I am terrified. I am begging for mercy to avoid military prison.
But Boyd doesn't beg. He goes entirely on the offensive. And he does it by weaponizing the military's own sacred texts against them.
Yes, he looks right at the officers straight in the face and asks if the principles of leadership are currently in effect on this base.
It is such a brilliant, terrifying trap, because the officers have to say yes. If they say no, that's an admission of dereliction of duty.
So they say yes, of course, they're in effect. And Boyd immediately quotes the specific principle that says an officer must look out for the welfare of his men.
Oh, man.
He looks at these officers who have been sleeping in a heated building while his guys are freezing in tents, and he basically argues that he was simply taking the necessary initiative to correct a profound leadership failure on their part.
He put the tribunal on trial.
And it actually worked. They weren't court-martialed. The base commander was so embarrassed by the reality of the situation that he just called a meeting to fix the supply shortages.
He literally beat the bureaucracy at 18 years old.
That's insane.
But he learned a foundational lesson there. He learned that a massive, rigid system, like the U.S. military, can be defeated if you understand its own internal logic better than the people running it. If you know their rules and you highlight their contradictions, you can paralyze them.
Okay, so we've got this kid who knows how to create smoke screens, exploit blind spots, and weaponize rules against his bosses. He eventually gets his wings, becomes a fighter pilot, flies combat missions in Korea, and ends up as a tactician at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada.
And this is where the legend of 42nd Boyd is officially born.
Right, because he was an instructor at the fighter weapons school, like the absolute elite. And he issues this standing challenge.
To anyone who came through, Air Force, Navy, Marines, didn't matter.
And the setup is just incredibly cocky. He basically says, we are going to fly up into the desert sky. I will let you get directly behind me. I'll give you every possible advantage. And I bet you $40 that in 40 seconds, you will be in my crosshairs.
And he did this for 6 years against the best combat pilots on planet Earth.
And he never lost. Not a single time.
He rarely even needed the full 40 seconds. He usually did it in 10 to 20 seconds.
See, this is where I struggled when reading the text because it sounds like literal magic. Like, how do you defy the physics of aerial combat?
Well, that's the secret. You don't defy physics, you exploit a fundamental misunderstanding of physics. At the time, the entire paradigm of fighter plane combat was based on two metrics: higher and faster.
Right, the idea was if my plane has a higher top speed and can fly at a higher altitude, I should theoretically win every fight.
Exactly. That was the conventional wisdom. But Boyd realized through all the chaos over Korea that raw speed and altitude were not actually the deciding factors. The pilot who survived wasn't the one who could fly in a straight line the fastest.
So who was it?
It was the pilot who could manipulate what Boyd called fast transients.
Okay, let's break this down into plain English because the text gets pretty technical here.
Sure. A transient is basically the transition between maneuvers. It's your ability to change from one energy state to another, shifting your speed, altering your altitude, rapidly changing your direction of flight. Boyd realized victory goes to whoever can transition between these states faster than the opponent can follow.
I was trying to visualize this, and I realized it's a lot like car racing. Like, if we are drag racing down a perfectly straight highway, the car with the massive engine and the highest top speed wins, right? Raw power dominates.
Yeah, in a linear environment, speed wins every time.
But a dog fight isn't a straight highway. It is a muddy, twisting, unpredictable rally car track winding through a forest.
That is a really great analogy.
Because if you take that massive drag racing car onto a rally track, it's going to crash into a tree at the very first turn. The rally car wins because it can brake, downshift, slide around a hairpin turn, and accelerate again without losing control. It has agility over raw power.
Exactly. And Boyd figured out how to fly his jet like a rally car. While the guy behind him was trying to use raw speed to catch him, Boyd would execute a maneuver that aggressively dumped his aircraft's energy.
Just hit the brakes, basically.
Yeah, he would rapidly slow down, pull an insanely tight, unexpected turn, and suddenly the attacker, who is still barreling forward at top speed, shoots right past him.
He forces them to overshoot by being more agile.
He out-adapted them in three-dimensional space. And this is where his insight starts to bleed out of the cockpit and into reality. Boyd realized that if you can continuously change your state faster than the other guy, you force him into a cognitive trap.
Wait, a cognitive trap?
Yeah. The enemy pilot ends up reacting to a situation that no longer exists. They are trying to shoot where you were, not where you are.
Oh, man. Think about how that applies to our daily lives. Think about how often we rely on that drag racer mentality.
Well, it all the time.
Right, like you hit a snag on a big project at work. What is the default human response? We just throw raw power at it. We grind harder. We stay at the office for 5 extra hours. We just try to brute force it.
Yeah, we try to outmuscle the problem rather than outmaneuvering it.
Or in a personal relationship, you get into a disagreement, and instead of pivoting or trying to understand the other angle, you just argue your point louder. You try to overwhelm them with volume.
Right.
But Boyd is proving that mastery isn't about grinding harder. It is about your fast transients. When your initial plan fails, how quickly can you downshift, bleed off that wasted energy, and slide into a completely different approach?
And this realization that physical agility destroys raw power
Right.
sparked a massive intellectual epiphany for Boyd. He stepped back and realized that the physical dogfight, the pulling of the stick and the dumping of the throttle, was just the output.
The actual war wasn't in the sky.
No, the real war was happening inside the minds of the two pilots. The physical plane was just an extension of a mental process.
So the pilot who processes information faster is the one manipulating the fast transients.
Exactly. Boyd spent years deconstructing this cognitive process, and he eventually gave it a name.
The OODA loop. OODA. This is basically the holy grail of Boyd's philosophy. It is the engine that drives everything we're going to talk about today.
Observation, orientation, decision, action. Now, I will say, it is incredibly easy to look at those 4 words and just dismiss them as some generic corporate management flowchart.
Honestly, when I first saw the acronym, I kind of rolled my eyes. I thought, well, yeah, I look at something, I think about it, and I do it. Thanks, John Boyd, you're a genius. It sounds painfully obvious.
It's deceptive in its simplicity. We really need to dissect how Boyd actually defined these terms, because it is deeply scientific. So let's look at observation. It is not just looking at things. It is the active intake of raw data from your environment and from your own internal state.
Okay, so in the cockpit, it's reading the radar, feeling the G-forces, seeing the flash of the enemy wing.
Yes. And in daily life, observation is noticing that your client's tone of voice suddenly shifted during a pitch, or seeing that your bank account balance just dropped unexpectedly.
Or even recognizing that your own heart rate is spiking because you feel threatened.
Exactly. It's the unfiltered gathering of unfolding circumstances.
Unfiltered, I think that's the key word, because the filtering happens in the very next step, orientation.
Orientation is the heavy lifter here. We're going to spend a lot of time on this later because it is the most complex part of the human mind. But simply put, orientation is how you make sense of the raw data you just observed.
It's the filter.
It is your brain running the data through the massive filter of your genetics, your cultural background, your past traumas, your education, and your prior experiences.
So it's a meaning-making machine. Like, two people can observe the exact same raw data, say, an ambiguous text message from a boss, and orient completely differently based on their insecurities or their confidence.
Exactly. Orientation produces a mental image of reality. And based on that mental image, you move to the third step, decision.
And this is another one where Boyd kind of flips the standard definition. We normally think of a decision as a final carved-in-stone edict, like, I have decided to do X.
Yeah, Boyd vehemently disagreed with that. In a chaotic environment, certainty is just an illusion. Therefore, Boyd viewed a decision as a hypothesis.
A hypothesis, like in a middle school science fair.
Basically, yeah, it is an educated guess.
Hmm.
Based on how I have oriented to this data, I hypothesize that if I take this specific course of action, I will achieve my desired result.
Which flows seamlessly into the final step, action. Action is just the physical testing of the hypothesis.
You execute the maneuver, you send the email, you launch the product. And the crucial thing is, the moment you act, you change the environment, which immediately generates new raw data.
And boom, you are right back to observation. That's why it is a loop.
It is a continuous, relentless cycle. It never stops. You observe the results of your action, orient to the new reality, form a new hypothesis, and test it again.
Framing action as a scientific test is actually a massive psychological advantage because it kind of removes the ego from failure.
It really does.
Right. Like, if I try a new marketing strategy and it totally flops, my default reaction is to feel like a failure, to get super defensive. But if I'm using the OODA loop, my action was just a test. The test failed. It doesn't mean I'm stupid, it just means my hypothesis was incorrect.
Likely because your orientation was based on flawed assumptions.
Right, so I take the new data, the failure, and I just run the loop again.
It totally neutralizes the emotional sting of a setback. But I have to say, the true magic of the OODA loop, the reason Boyd never lost that $40 bet, is not just about completing the cycle, it is about velocity.
Speed of the loop.
Yes. Boyd realized that if you can cycle through observation, orientation, decision, and action significantly faster than your opponent, you gain an almost insurmountable compounding advantage. He called this getting inside the opponent's OODA loop.
Can you break down the actual mechanics of that? Like, what happens to the guy on the other side?
Okay, let's trace it. You and your opponent observe the same initial event. You both start orienting because you are faster. You form a hypothesis and act while your opponent is still trying to decide what to do.
So my action changes the environment.
Yes. The reality is just shifted. So your opponent, who is just about to act on their first decision, suddenly realizes the environment they are acting upon no longer exists.
Their data is stale.
Exactly. So they have to abort their action and start all over at observation.
But while they're starting over, I'm already on my second or third loop.
Precisely. You are generating a relentless pace of changing reality. Every time they try to get a fix on you, you've already moved. You force them to react to a ghost.
The psychological toll of that must be devastating.
It creates intense cognitive overload. The adversary experiences profound confusion, panic, and disorder. They literally feel like they are moving through molasses, while you seem to be operating at light speed.
That's wild.
Boyd actually loved using elite athletes to illustrate this feeling. The texts mention Troy Aikman, the legendary quarterback.
Right. Aikman talked about the sensation of the game slowing down.
During his absolute peak performances, Aikman said it felt like all the opposing defensive players were running at half speed. He had all the time in the world to survey the field, check his receivers, and throw the perfect pass.
Which is crazy because he wasn't physically seeing in slow motion. His OODA loop was just turning so incredibly fast that he was processing the defense's movements before the defenders even knew where they were going.
Exactly. And Michael Jordan described the exact same phenomenon. Jordan noted that during the NBA Finals, his physical speed wasn't the deciding factor. He said, "We were making adjustments to them quicker than they were making adjustments to us."
Mental fast transience.
Yes. Jordan's greatness was his ability to cycle through the OD loop faster than the defense could comprehend.
Let's bring this down to earth for a minute. Imagine a major crisis hits your daily life. Let's say you are managing a massive event, like a wedding or a corporate conference. It's 2 days before the event and the catering company goes bankrupt. Total chaos. Well, what happens to most people in that scenario?
Oh, their OD loop completely freezes. The shock of the mismatch just paralyzes them.
They get stuck in observation. They just stare at the email from the caterer. Or worse, they get trapped in a flawed orientation. They start crying, blaming the universe, complaining about how unfair it is.
They're burning all this energy without moving forward.
And while the clock is ticking. But the person who understands Boyd's framework immediately recognizes the need for velocity. They just cycle through.
Right. They observe, okay, we have no food, they orient. We have 48 hours, a panicked client, and the catering budget. They decide on a hypothesis. I will call 5 local food truck vendors and offer them a premium cash bonus. And they act. They make calls.
And if the first 3 food trucks say no, they don't freeze. That is just new data. They observe the rejection, orient to the dwindling options, form a new hypothesis like, maybe we order 300 pizzas, and act again.
Whoever spins that loop the fastest owns the situation. The chaos literally becomes their playground.
That is such an empowering way to look at stress.
It is, but there is a really dangerous trap here. When people hear about the need for speed, they assume they should just rush frantically through the 4 steps. But all 4 steps are not created equal. If you treat them as equal, you will crash.
Right, because one step is the undisputed king of the loop.
Boyd called it the Big O orientation. He borrowed a term from German military doctrine, Schwerpunkt. It basically translates to the center of gravity, or the main focus of effort. Orientation is the Schwerpunkt of the ODO loop.
But why is it so dominant? Like, why not observation? Isn't getting the right data the most important thing?
Because if your observation is flawless, like, you see exactly what is happening with perfect clarity, but your orientation is flawed, you will misinterpret the data and formulate a disastrous hypothesis. Orientation dictates how you observe, what you decide, and how you act. It is the literal lens through which reality is constructed.
Okay, we really need to dissect this big O. If this is the engine that drives our survival and success, we have to know how it is built. Hammond's text notes that orientation is shaped by our genetics, culture, and previous experiences.
Yes.
But Boyd pointed out that the actual mechanics of orientation rely on our ability to perform 2 very specific cognitive tasks: analysis and synthesis.
And this is arguably Boyd's most profound intellectual contribution. To explain how we should build our orientation, he developed this brilliant thought experiment. He used it in a famous briefing called the strategic game. It is universally known as the snowmobile experiment.
I had to read this part 3 times because it is such a visual, striking way to understand creativity. Let's actually play it out.
Okay, let's do it. Imagine you are looking at a screen and there are 4 completely distinct, unrelated video clips playing. In the first clip, you see a skier carving their way down a snowy mountain slope.
Got it. A skier on a mountain.
In the second clip, you are in sunny Florida, watching an outboard motorboat speeding across a lake.
Okay, a boat with an outboard motor.
In the third clip, a teenager is riding a bicycle down a paved suburban street.
Bicycle.
And in the fourth clip, a toddler is sitting on a rug, playing with a toy tank or a tractor that rolls on rubber caterpillar treads.
Toy tractor with rubber treads. Okay, so we have 4 entirely different domains. A snowy mountain, a lake, a street, and a living room.
Now, Boyd says you must employ the cognitive tool of analysis. Analysis is a destructive process. It means to pull things apart, to isolate a concept into its constituent elements. So in your mind, pull the skis off the skier.
Skis are isolated.
Pull the outboard motor off the back of the boat.
Motor isolated.
Put the handlebars off the bicycle.
Handlebars ready.
And pull the rubber caterpillar treads off the toy tractor.
Okay, so I've used analysis, I've broken everything down. Now I just have this pile of random, useless parts sitting in my mental garage.
Right, and now comes the magic. Now you employ synthesis. Synthesis is the exact opposite of analysis. It is the creative, intuitive act of putting disparate, seemingly unrelated things together to form a new, coherent whole.
Okay.
So Boyd asks, what do you get when you synthesize the skis, the outboard motor, the handlebars, and the rubber treads?
Oh man, When you put the skis on the front, the treads on the back, attach the motor, and steer with the handlebars, you get a snowmobile.
Exactly. You have created a snowmobile out of parts that originally had absolutely nothing to do with snow or winter sports.
Mm-hmm.
This is how Boyd viewed genius. He categorized human beings into two distinct groups, those who can build snowmobiles and those who can't.
So the people who can build snowmobiles are the ones who can face an unpredictable, chaotic reality, pull useful concepts from completely unrelated fields, and synthesize them into a new tool to navigate the terrain.
Yes. And the losers are the ones who stare at the pile of parts, stare at the skis and the motor, and say, well, these don't belong together. This is a boat part and a ski part. They just remain paralyzed by rigid categories.
Taking that a step further, doesn't this highlight a massive vulnerability in how we all live our lives?
How so?
Well, if my orientation, my ability to build snowmobiles, relies entirely on the parts I have available in my mental garage, aren't I heavily biased by my own limited experience?
Oh, absolutely. That is the core vulnerability of the human condition.
Like, if I am an accountant and I spend 30 years only reading accounting books, only hanging out with accountants, and only analyzing spreadsheets, my mental garage is entirely filled with accounting parts.
And when a crisis hits that cannot be solved by a spreadsheet, like a health crisis, a marital issue, a sudden shift in technology, you will reach into your garage, frantically try to synthesize a solution, and the only thing you will be able to build is a slightly different spreadsheet.
Wow.
You will fail because you lack the necessary parts to build a snowmobile for that specific terrain.
Which explains why Boyd was so obsessive about his reading habits. The guy was a fighter pilot, but he didn't just read about airplanes.
Oh, no. To understand human conflict and survival, Boyd became this voracious, multidisciplinary scholar. He taught himself calculus. He studied theoretical physics, quantum mechanics, thermodynamics. He read deeply into evolutionary biology, psychology, anthropology, and the history of ancient warfare.
He was aggressively, intentionally diversifying the inputs, feeding his big O.
He was hoarding different parts for future snowmobiles.
So for the person listening to this right now who wants to improve their agility and problem solving, the mandate is totally clear. You have to break out of your intellectual silo.
You absolutely must actively diversify your information diet.
If you work in marketing and you have an intractable problem with a campaign, reading another marketing blog written by another marketer isn't going to give you a breakthrough. You need a different part. Maybe you read a book on how viruses spread in evolutionary biology. Maybe that biological mechanism synthesizes with your marketing problem and boom, you've built a viral campaign snowmobile. You have to seek out friction and unfamiliar territory.
Synthesis is the crucible of innovation. But Boyd was also a realist. He knew that even if you possess a massive, diverse orientation, and even if you synthesize a beautiful, perfect snowmobile, you are still going to fail.
Right, because what happens when the snow melts? You're just sitting on a snowmobile in the mud. What happens when reality simply refuses to conform to your brilliant plan?
And this is where Boyd transitions from a military tactician into almost a philosopher of science. He rooted his ultimate theories of strategy not just in history, but in hard science. He leaned on what he called his scientific trinity.
I'm going to be honest, when I hit this section of the notes, my brain started to hurt.
Yeah, it's deep.
We are jumping from dogfights and snowmobiles into some seriously heavy science. But it is crucial for understanding why our lives get so chaotic. Let's take these one by one and please explain them to me like I am a 5-year-old.
We can do that. The trinity consists of Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorem, Werner Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, and the second law of thermodynamics, which deals with entropy.
Okay, let's start with Gödel. Incompleteness theorem. What does a 1930s mathematical theorem have to do with my daily stress?
So Gödel essentially proved that any logical system will eventually contain statements or truths that cannot be proven from within that system itself.
I mean, I'm already lost. Give me a real-world example.
Think about a massive, comprehensive rulebook for a corporation. The rulebook is designed to dictate every behavior, but eventually a situation will arise that the rulebook didn't anticipate. If you try to use the rulebook to prove that the rulebook is perfect, you can't. You have to step outside the rulebook, use common sense or outside legal advice to resolve the issue. Gödel proved mathematically that you cannot fully understand a system by only looking inside it.
Okay, so applied to the human mind, I can never fully comprehend reality if I'm only relying on my own internal closed-off logic. I can never know everything perfectly.
Exactly. The human mind is an incomplete system. Second, we have Heisenberg's uncertainty principle from quantum mechanics.
Right. Something about particles.
Yeah. Heisenberg showed that there is a fundamental physical limit to how precisely we can measure things at the quantum level. You cannot know both the exact position and the exact momentum of a particle at the same time. The very act of observing it changes it.
How does that translate to the macro world? Let's use a sports metaphor. If I'm watching a baseball pitcher throw a fastball, I can track the speed, right?
You can track the speed, but to do so with absolute precision, you lose information about its exact location at a specific microsecond. The broader philosophical takeaway Boyd extracted is that precision has absolute limits.
We live in an inherently uncertain universe.
Exactly. You cannot predict the future with perfect accuracy because you can never measure the present with perfect accuracy.
So Gödel says my logic is flawed. Heisenberg says my measurements are fuzzy. What does the second law of thermodynamics add to this depressing trinity?
Entropy. The second law states that in any closed system, order will inevitably degrade into disorder and chaos over time unless energy is pumped in from the outside.
Okay, this one I understand intimately. If I clean my garage, it is a highly ordered system, but if I just close the door and leave it alone for 6 months, somehow it becomes a disaster area. Dust accumulates, things fall over, spiders move in, it naturally decays into chaos.
Or think of a stagnant company. If a company stops taking in new ideas from the outside market, if it becomes a closed system, its internal processes will decay, bureaucracy will choke it, and it will eventually collapse.
So, if we synthesize Boyd's trinity, we can never know everything perfectly, we can never measure our environment precisely, and if we isolate ourselves and start taking in new information, our lives will disintegrate into chaos.
It sounds incredibly bleak. It sounds like a guarantee of failure.
It really does.
But for Boyd, this wasn't cause for despair, it was the ultimate strategic liberation. It explains exactly why our plans always fail. If we accept this scientific reality, we must accept that our mental image of the world, our orientation, will inevitably, constantly fail to match reality. Boyd called this a mismatch.
A mismatch. That is the collision between what we expected to happen and what the universe actually did.
It's when you expect the pitch meeting to go beautifully and the client tears your idea apart. It's when you expect your investment to compound and the market crashes. It is the painful realization that your orientation was wrong.
Now, human nature dictates that when we encounter a mismatch, we panic. We view it as a personal failure. We get defensive. Or we try to forcefully bend reality back to fit our mental model. We say, well, the clients are just stupid. They didn't get it.
We deny the new data. But Boyd saw mismatches as the ultimate fuel for human progress. He introduced a concept called the conceptual spiral.
How does the spiral work?
Boyd argued that without mismatches, there's no need for novelty. If your plans always worked perfectly, you would never learn anything new. You would stagnate. A mismatch is the universe's way of violently signaling that your current orientation is outdated. It is an invitation to evolve.
Because to survive the second law of thermodynamics, living systems must be open systems.
Exactly. We have to constantly interact with the outside world, accept the conflicting, painful, mismatched data, and use it to shatter our old orientation and build a new, more accurate one. If you avoid the pain of the mismatch, you become a closed system and you decay.
I was trying to find a modern analogy for this, and I realized it is exactly how a GPS navigation system works.
Oh, that's an interesting angle. Walk me through it.
Think about driving in a strange city. Your GPS has a plan, an orientation. It tells you to take the highway exit. But you get distracted and you miss the turn. You have just created a mismatch between the plan and reality.
Right.
Now, a fragile human ego would despair. Or a really stubborn, closed-minded person would just pretend they didn't miss the turn and keep driving blindly, ending up in a lake.
They deny the mismatch.
But what does the GPS do? It doesn't judge you. It doesn't cry. It immediately acknowledges the mismatch. The little voice just calmly says, recalculating.
That is brilliant. Recalculating is the exact technological equivalent of initiating a new OODA loop.
It takes the new painful data, the fact that you are miles away from where you should be, runs it through the map, synthesizes a new route, and gives you a new action.
Yeah.
This is exactly how we have to reframe our daily failures. When your carefully laid plan blows up in your face, it is not a catastrophe. It is the universe handing you the precise data you are missing. It is forcing you to recalculate.
The ability to rapidly embrace a mismatch, absorb the blow to your ego, and recalculate is what separates survivors from victims in a chaotic world.
Okay, so this gives us a profound tool for managing our own internal chaos and our personal failures. But Boyd was a warrior. He didn't just use this for self-improvement, he used the OODA loop offensively to navigate external chaos.
Right.
Specifically, how do you use this framework against an adversary, a competitor, or a massive bureaucracy that is actively trying to stop you?
The primary goal in conflict, according to Boyd, is to fold the adversary back inside themselves. You want to paralyze their cognitive process. You do this, as we discussed, by operating at a faster tempo.
But speed alone isn't enough, is it?
No, you also have to deliberately disrupt their observation and orientation. You inject friction into their loop.
The text mentions he did this through a carefully calibrated mix of ambiguity and deception. I really want to pull these apart because colloquially we use those words interchangeably, but tactically they are very different tools.
They are completely different mechanisms. Boyd loved to use an example from World War II to illustrate the difference. After the Allied invasion of Normandy, as American troops were advancing rapidly through France, groups of German soldiers stole American jeeps and military police uniforms.
Okay.
They drove ahead of the advancing Allied columns and started physically changing the road signs at intersections to point the wrong way.
That is a classic deception. You are feeding the enemy false data to make them turn left instead of right.
Yes, it is a lie. But Boyd pointed out the fatal flaw of pure deception. If you change all the road signs to point the wrong way, eventually the Americans will capture a German soldier or consult a local map, and they will discover the lie.
And once you figure out the lie, the deception is totally useless.
Worse than useless, it becomes a reliable tool for the enemy. Once the Americans realize all the signs are backwards, they just flip their orientation. Whenever they see a sign pointing left, they go right. Order is instantly restored, and the enemy's OODA loop speeds back up.
Okay, so how do you upgrade from deception to ambiguity?
Boyd argued. What if the Germans hadn't changed all the signs? What if they only changed a third of them, chosen completely at random?
Oh, wow. That is infinitely more devious.
Yes, because you have moved from a lie to ambiguity. When you create ambiguity, you paralyze the enemy's OODA loop because they can no longer trust their own observations.
Because if only some of the signs are wrong, every single time an American convoy reaches an intersection, they have to stop the trucks. They have to pull out the maps, argue with the commander, maybe send out a scouting party. They second-guess their reality.
You haven't just given them false information. You have systematically destroyed their trust in their own senses. Their OODA loop grinds to an absolute halt, stretching out their cycle time while you maintain your tempo and escape.
That is psychological warfare. And the crazy thing is, Boyd didn't just theorize about this. He used this exact kind of tempo, ambiguity, and disruption against his own superiors inside the Pentagon.
The bureaucratic guerrilla warfare Boyd waged is legendary. He was the intellectual center of a group of rogue officers and civilian analysts who became known as fighter mafia.
We have to set the stage for this because it sounds like a movie. It's the late 60s and early 70s. What was the Air Force brass focused on building at that time?
The prevailing doctrine, heavily influenced by the military-industrial complex, favored massive, heavy, incredibly expensive interceptors. Planes like the F-15. They were designed to fly incredibly fast in a straight line and shoot radar-guided missiles from miles away.
The drag racers.
Exactly. They were essentially flying computers. But Boyd, having written the literal textbook on air-to-air combat, knew that in a real war, missiles miss. You eventually end up in a close-range dogfight.
And in a dogfight, a heavy, sluggish interceptor is a flying coffin.
Yeah. Boyd and the fighter mafia wanted a lightweight, highly maneuverable, stripped-down fighter jet focused purely on agility and fast transients.
The F-16.
Yes, what would eventually become the F-16. But the senior generals viewed this lightweight fighter as a direct threat to their budgets and their prestigious heavy bombers. They actively tried to kill the project at every single turn.
So you have a lowly colonel going to war against 3-star and 4-star generals who control the money and the power. How does Boyd win that fight?
By relentlessly getting inside the Pentagon's decision cycle. Boyd understood that a bureaucracy is just a giant, slow-moving OODA loop. So he built a massive, unofficial network of allies, sympathizers, and outright moles throughout the Pentagon.
He gathered the observations before the enemy even knew the battle had started.
He would find out exactly what objections the generals were going to raise in a meeting, days before the meeting actually happened. There was a famous story involving a civilian engineer named Harry Hilliker, who worked closely with Boyd.
I love this story. Set the scene.
Hilliker is called in to give a highly contentious briefing on the lightweight fighter concept to a room full of hostile Air Force brass. The generals are ready to rip him apart. But as the briefing progresses, Hilliker systematically dismantles every single objection they raise. He fields their highly technical questions with stunning, off-the-cuff brilliance. He cites data, aerodynamics, cost analysis.
And the generals are just sitting there, absolutely shocked that this civilian could anticipate all their doctrinal concerns in real time.
He looked like a genius who was just thinking on his feet.
But the secret was, it wasn't on his feet.
No. Boyd and Hilliker had stayed up the entire night before in Boyd's apartment, aggressively rehearsing the exact questions the generals were going to ask.
Because Boyd's moles had already stolen the general's playbook.
They operated inside the bureaucracy's OODA loop. By the time a general opened his mouth to voice a concern, Hilliker already had the counterargument locked, loaded, and beautifully synthesized. They preempted the friction. They made the generals feel like they were moving in slow motion.
Let's translate this to the listener who is trying to survive corporate America. This is an absolute masterclass in how to advocate for good ideas when you are surrounded by red tape.
It applies perfectly.
If you are pitching a radical new project at work and you know the finance department is a notoriously slow-moving bureaucracy that is obsessed with very specific ROI metrics and risk mitigation, you do not walk into that meeting and just pitch the creative vision waiting for them to object.
If you do, you are letting them dictate the tempo. You will crash right into their friction.
Instead, you anticipate their orientation. You know they only care about risk and ROI, so you preemptively supply the exact data they need, formatted in the exact spreadsheets they prefer, before they even ask for it. You build your presentation entirely around dismantling their predicted objections.
You bypass their friction by orienting to their needs before they even articulate them. You are running your loop faster than their bureaucracy can process it.
But, I mean, we have to acknowledge the dark side of this. Being a maverick, running circles around your bosses and pointing out their flaws, that comes at a massive personal cost.
It does.
Boyd made powerful, lifelong enemies. He didn't care about rank. He only cared about the truth of the system.
And this relentless pursuit of truth at the expense of career advancement led to one of the most poignant moments in his life. It is captured in his famous "to be or to do" speech, which he delivered to a young protege named Jim Burton.
Jim Burton is a legend in his own right. He's the guy who later blew the whistle on the rig testing of the Bradley fighting vehicle, which is a whole other story. But he learned that integrity from Boyd. Can you lay out the speech? It is a gut punch.
So Boyd saw that Burton was a rising star, but he was reaching a critical juncture. Boyd sat him down and essentially laid out the stark reality of the world. He said, there are two career paths in front of you. One path leads to promotions, titles, and positions of distinction. To achieve success down that path, you have to compromise. You have to go along with the system, smile at the right people, and show that you are a good, compliant team player.
The path of to be a general, to be a VP, to be a person of status.
Exactly. The other path, Boyd said, leads to doing things that are truly significant. You will actually make a difference for the country or for your organization. But the rewards will often be a kick in the stomach. You will be passed over for promotions. You will be marginalized because you have to cross swords with the party line. You cannot go down both paths.
You have to choose.
So, Boyd asked him, do you want to be a man of distinction, or do you want to do things that really influence the shape of the Air Force? To be or to do, that is the question.
To be somebody or to do something, Boyd fundamentally chose to do. He retired as a colonel. He was never given his star to become a general. He lived in a modest basement apartment, wore cheap, ill-fitting suits, and refused to take a dime for his extensive consulting work after retirement because he refused to let anyone buy his loyalty.
He lived his philosophy with absolute, uncompromising integrity.
He really did. But as inspiring as his solitary, rogue actions were, there is a limit to being a lone wolf. Boyd knew that you cannot OODA alone forever.
No, you can't.
If you want to win a war or build a complex aircraft or run a successful global company, you have to get a massive group of people to move through this cycle together.
This is the ultimate challenge of organizational dynamics. How do you actually scale agility?
Right. Because if one person running a hyperfast OODA loop is a fighter pilot, 1,000 people trying to run their own individual OODA loops simultaneously just sounds like a riot. It sounds like pure entropy. How do they not just trip over each other and create chaos?
To solve this, Boyd turned his attention to organizational leadership, and his views were just as radical as his views on dogfighting. He absolutely despised the traditional foundational military concept of command and control, which he abbreviated as C, and C.
Which is deeply ironic because command and control is basically the defining feature of any military organization in history.
It is. But Boyd argued that strict command and control is a mechanical, top-down system that fundamentally misunderstands human nature. When a commander tries to explicitly control every single action of a subordinate, they inject massive amounts of friction into the system.
Because you are destroying the subordinate's OODA loop. Think about the cognitive burden of that reporting structure. If I am on the front lines and I observe a sudden change in the enemy's position, I can't just act.
No, under C and C, you have to send an observation up the chain of command. You wait. You wait for the commander, who is miles away and lacks the ground truth, to orient to your data. You wait for them to decide, and you wait for the order to come back down so you can act.
And by the time the order arrives, the reality on the ground has completely changed. The commander is dictating actions based on a ghost reality. It makes the entire group's OODA loop terrifyingly slow.
Precisely. To scale agility, Boyd advocated for a completely different paradigm, which he called appreciation and leadership. And to build this, he relied heavily on two specific German military concepts, Schwerpunkt and Auftragstaktik.
Okay, we touched on Schwerpunkt earlier as the center of gravity in the OODA loop. How does it apply to leading a team?
In a leadership context, Schwerpunkt represents the unifying, overarching intent of the commander. It is the ultimate goal, the why behind the operation.
And Auftragstaktik.
It translates roughly to mission-type orders. It is a mechanism of execution.
Meaning, as a leader, you do not tell your team how to do a job. You only tell them what needs to be accomplished and why it matters.
Exactly. You provide the intent, the Schwerpunkt, and you ruthlessly empower the subordinate to use their own localized observations and orientations to make decisions and take actions on the ground in real time.
This philosophy draws heavily on Karl von Clausewitz, right, the Prussian military theorist. Hammond's text spends a lot of time connecting Boyd to Clausewitz.
Yes, Boyd deeply admired Clausewitz, specifically two essential psychological traits that Clausewitz identified as necessary for military genius: coup d'oeil and presence of mind.
I love these terms. Coup d'oeil is French for the insightful glance.
Or the inward eye.
Mm.
It describes the intuitive ability of a commander to look at a chaotic, smoke-filled battlefield, cut through the noise, and instantly grasp the underlying truth of the situation. It's the ability to recognize the decisive point of attack without needing hours of ponderous analytical study.
It is the ultimate expression of a highly developed orientation. And what about presence of mind?
Presence of mind is the psychological resilience to deal with the unexpected. It is the capacity to maintain your cognitive balance and think rapidly when everything is collapsing around you.
So if a leader demands strict, top-down command and control, they are essentially telling your team, do not use your coup d'oeil, do not trust your insightful glance, and suppress your presence of mind. Just shut off your brain and wait for my explicit orders.
It creates incredibly fragile organizations. This raises a vital question for everyone listening to this. How much of your daily stress, your burnout, comes from trying to micromanage the outcomes of the people around you?
Oof, that hits very close to home.
Whether you are a director managing a team of software engineers at a tech startup, or you are just a parent trying to organize a massive family vacation, the urge to command and control every detail is overwhelming. We want to script every interaction to prevent failure.
We want to write the rule book. But as Gödel proved, the rule book will fail. And when the plan changes, because the second law of thermodynamics guarantees entropy will ruin the itinerary, if you have micromanaged your family or your team, everyone just freezes. They don't have the autonomy to adjust. They lack a shared orientation.
Boyd pointed to the German Blitzkrieg in the early days of World War II to illustrate how this is solved. Now, obviously, we must separate the objective evil of the Nazi regime from the mechanics of their military tactics. But purely from a structural standpoint, the Blitzkrieg was revolutionary.
Why was it so much faster than the French or British armies?
Because it was not based on rigid top-down timetables. The panzer divisions were successful precisely because they bypassed enemy strongpoints, found gaps in the lines, and trusted their low-level frontline commanders to exploit those opportunities instantly, without radioing back to headquarters for permission.
They operated on Auftragstaktik.
Yes, they had a deeply shared intent. They understood the Schwerpunkt.
There is a quote I read summarizing this concept that I absolutely love. Synchronize your people's understanding. Don't just synchronize their watches.
That's perfect.
Right. If your startup team deeply understands the why of the product, the overarching intent, you can let them figure out the how in real time when the market shifts. That is how a group of people runs a fast OODA loop without tripping over each other.
It requires a tremendous, terrifying amount of implicit trust. You have to trust that you have hired well and that your subordinates have built robust orientations. You have to trust that they have enough snowmobile parts in their mental garages to make good decisions when the environment inevitably devolves into chaos.
This has been an unbelievable journey. We started with an 18-year-old kid freezing in a tent in Japan, ripping apart a hangar to stay warm. We moved to a hotshot fighter pilot winning $40 bets over the Nevada desert.
Yep.
We followed a rogue colonel waging guerrilla warfare inside the Pentagon to build the F-16. And we ended up with a profound philosopher synthesizing quantum mechanics, thermodynamics, and the nature of human survival.
John Boyd really left us with a master key for navigating the modern world. The OODA loop observation orientation decision action is not a corporate checklist. It is a biological continuous spiral of adaptation.
And the absolute core of that spiral, your greatest asset, is your big O, your orientation. The biggest takeaway I have from this entire deep dive is the mandate to feed that orientation continuously. Read outside your field. Talk to people whose politics or worldviews you completely disagree with. Study biology if you are in finance. Build more snowmobiles.
And crucially, when your plans blow up, do not panic. Do not deny the reality.
Embrace the mismatch. Let the universe hand you that painful new data, acknowledge that your hypothesis failed, say, recalculating, and cycle your loop faster than your problems can evolve.
Based on Boyd's scientific trinity, we know the undeniable truth of the universe. Living systems are open systems, and closed systems inevitably trend toward disorder, decay, and disintegration.
So we want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. Take a hard look at your own life right now. Look at your career, your personal relationships, or your daily routines. Where have you stopped taking in new information? Where have you trapped yourself in a closed, decaying loop, convinced that you already know exactly how the world works? And what new snowmobile are you going to force yourself to build tomorrow to break out of it?
It is a question worth answering every single day.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Until next time, keep your loops tight, embrace the mismatches, and keep your orientation wide open.